if you look at the history of the region, when Syria is unstable, the region becomes unstable. If we engage them, it may work out, it may not work out. If we did not engage them, it was guaranteed to not work out. In fact, it is our assessment that, frankly, the transitional authority, given the challenges they're facing, are maybe weeks, not many months, away from potential collapse and a full-scale civil war of epic proportions, basically the country splitting up.
The extent to which Rubio said that now to members of Congress, I think he's really making a plea to members of Congress to say, do your part in lifting these sanctions, because we need to give Syria a better chance. It's the million-dollar question, because there is no playbook for sanctions lifting in a context that's as complicated as Syria. The U.S. alone has dozens of restrictions on Syria, and it's had sanctions on Syria since 1979. So simply unraveling all of those sanctions is a monumental lift for the Trump administration. It requires action from the U.S. Congress, also from the Departments of Commerce and State and Treasury. And so for Trump to make good on his promise to lift sanctions on Syria, he has his work cut out for him. So no one set a timeline. We actually don't know. I hear that there are discussions in Washington about the way in which sanctions should be removed. And I think there are sort of two possibilities. The first possibility is that the Trump administration sort of backtracks on what I see as its promise and starts to implement a sort of incremental sanctions relief. And that would entail Congress repealing several pieces of legislation, particularly the Caesar Act, and it would also entail the Trump administration to lift a whole bunch of sanctions like the state-sponsored terrorism designation on Syria itself, the foreign terrorist organization designation on the HTS, which is the rebel group that el-Chareh, the new Syrian president, belonged to, and then unravel a range of different restrictions that are that both the White House can do, but also Treasury has a hand in, and the Department of Commerce and so forth. The second option is the harder option, but I believe that's the only way to actually implement this promise of lifting all sanctions on Syria. They're pretty different. We're still waiting on the exact commitments by the European Union, but they have an expiration date for many of the sanctions in June. And so once that expiration date expires, if they don't renew the sanctions, then many of the sanctions expire. The United States has no such expiration date, sunset clause, or anything like that on most of its sanctions. It had one for the Caesar Act in December, but when the expiration date, or so-called sunset clause, passed, members of Congress decided to extend the Caesar Act again. So from a U.S. perspective, a lot of power is concentrated in the president's hands on this one, and we just have to wait to see what he'll do. Trump's announcement in Riyadh came really out of the blue for me. I'd been told for months that the folks around President Trump did not want to see quick sanctions lifting. I think he was really influenced by the leadership of Turkey and the leadership of Saudi Arabia. And so for me, Trump recognized that this was something that his regional counterparts were calling for. But Rubio's right. Syria is hanging off the precipice of a very, very great risk. The economy is spiraling. Security is very weak. The new authorities have a very tenuous hold over security. 90% of the population live below the poverty line. We're seeing a growing hunger crisis. So, I mean, Syria is really at crisis mode. And my colleagues at the International Crisis Group and I have been saying for months, something needs to be done on the economic front because Syria is really in dire straits. Rubio has said that Syria's transition away from Assad and towards a new government is a historic opportunity for the United States to have an ally in that part of the world. Syria has been a nemesis of the United States for decades, and we're clearly seeing with this historic meeting between President al-Chareh and Trump in Riyadh, recalibration of relations. Al-Chareh and his rebel group HTS fought the Russians and the Iranian proxies in Syria for many years, and so they're clearly interested in turning a page. What America's interests are, I don't think we fully know yet. It's clear to me that the Gulf is very interested in investing in Syria. Since Trump's announcement, there have been visits by businessmen from the Gulf to see what kind of investment opportunities they can find, and also commitments from the UAE, for instance, to rebuild the port of Tartus. I don't know if we'll see American investment, though. That's still a question mark. I don't think we're talking about weeks for sanctions relief. I think we'd be lucky if we're talking months. I can't even begin to unravel in just a few minutes all of the this sort of enormous web of sanctions that exist on Syria from the U.S. perspective. So simply to undo them, it's going to take a huge effort, and it will probably take a lot of time. And all other cases of sanctions lifting on countries that are as heavily sanctioned as Syria really they've taken years, not months. And I think once the sanctions are lifted, if the sanctions are lifted, the spotlight that was on sanctions will turn onto Syria's myriad other problems. Just from an economic perspective, Syrian banking is essentially a black box. The Syrian central bank is, which has been sanctioned for a long time, it has been out of touch from global financial markets, and so international banks will have to know: do we have confidence in engaging with the Syrian central bank and other central banks? I think it's much more likely now that the United States will continue to deepen relations with the Syrian authorities, start talking about recognition. But we're really talking early days here, and I think we have to wait and see what happens. It was not a condition for sanctions relief. I don't know if it will become a condition for sanctions relief, but so far it hasn't been a condition for sanctions relief. And obviously al-Chareh will have to balance the interests of his own various competing constituencies in Syria and try to understand what's best for the country. We know that al-Chareh has said that he wants peaceful relations with all of his neighbors, including Israel. We know that one of the Trump administration's asks of al-Chareh is that he join the Abraham Accords. At least that's what we've heard. Whether the Syrian authorities will decide that it makes sense for them to join the Abraham Accords, I don't know. I mean, this is sort of an entirely new world. I think we just have to wait and see on that one.